Imu is the master when it comes to control and manipulation. He is capable of freely taking over, controlling, and even fundamentally changing people through one of his contracts. With the Deepsea and Abyss contracts, he can do this from anywhere in the world. He can observe them at any time. He can intervene at any time. With the Shallow Sea contract, there is at least the limitation that Imu has to be near the respective person, but that is already all. According to our current information, Imu can also take over such a person. And if Imu is capable of doing that, then why not also other abilities that affect the mind, which he can use with the Deepsea or Abyss contract? If one considers that normally only people who serve the world government receive such a contract, then this is usually not something we need to worry about, in the sense that we ask ourselves whether popular characters on the side of the Straw Hats could be in danger because of this ability. Harold was, in terms of character, naturally on the good side, even though he served the world government and even the Holy Knights, God and Imu directly. But he is clearly an exception. Now, however, Harold is not the only exception. Shanks is another one as well. He once possessed a Shadow Sea contract and was therefore, for a certain period of time, in a state in which Imu could have freely manipulated him and quite possibly even changed his character. Of course, Shanks himself says that Imu has to be close to a person with the contract, but since Shanks spent time in Mary Geoise and certainly also in Pangaea Castle from time to time, Imu would have had the opportunity to influence Shanks. I think we can be very certain about that. I mean, if Imu was close enough to give him the mark, then he was certainly also close enough to touch Shanks' mind. Now one could of course say, well, the possibility was there, but Imu obviously did not do it because if he had, then Shanks would not be in opposition to the world government. Gaben and other Roger pirates would have noticed the change in character. The same applies to his crew members, and even more so, he would not have stolen the Nika fruit from the world government and given it to the person who later became the new Joy Boy, against whom Imu obviously holds a grudge. After all, he seems to have killed Saturn because he let Joy Boy escape. But just because that is the case, can we really rule out that Imu did not do something to Shanks after all? Perhaps something less noticeable or something that only Imu needs to activate later. If I am not overlooking anything, there is nothing that speaks against this possibility. There is theoretically even the possibility that Shanks still possesses a certain connection to Imu. He got rid of the mark, but does that dissolve all connections to Imu? We do not know. And that is not even what this is about. But it does illustrate that the possibility definitely exists, that Imu still has something up his sleeve against Shanks. A question we can of course ask ourselves is whether Imu would install some kind of control mechanism in God's Knights and above, if he were capable of doing so. And there I would say, let's just take a look at the way Imu fights, and how he treats his subordinates. One of his most powerful abilities, which Imu has already used several times in his few appearances, is Domi Reversi. It is an ability to turn people into demons and into subordinates. He can control these people to a certain degree. He is also capable of doing the same to his Gorosei and Holy Knights. He is obviously someone who uses this type of ability very frequently and gladly whenever he gets the opportunity. Consequently, I think that he would install a control mechanism in his subordinates if he had the opportunity. I mean, it's not like he truly respects them and would refrain from doing so out of respect. Saturn is the best example against that. He served Imu for hundreds of years, and Imu did not hesitate for a single moment to kill him. Of course, Saturn did not deliver the very best performance, and he was responsible for the ancient robot being on the island in the first place. But at the same time he was also facing quite strong opponents. That he did not perform optimally against a Luffy is not particularly surprising. Imu, however, did not care. He wanted results. Saturn did not deliver, and consequently he did not hesitate for a second to eliminate him. If he does not even hesitate to kill one of the Gorosei, then he would certainly not hesitate to install some kind of control mechanism in a God's Knight if he can, especially when this God's Knight was on the ship of the Pirate King, which the world government knew. After all, they sent Holy Knights to bring Shanks back. The question therefore is what such a control mechanism would look like, and what role it could still play. There are certain parallels between Moria and Imu. Moria has shadow abilities, and Imu is always depicted as this shadow-like being or as a silhouette. Both walk to a freezer chamber during their introduction. In Imu's freezer chamber there was a straw hat, while in Moria's there was Ars, and he was later awakened through the straw hat by Luffy's shadow. These are parallels we have known about for quite some time. By now we know that there is in particular one further very strong parallel. Both are characterized by the ability to control their subordinates. In the final fight against Moria, he absorbed his shadows into himself and thereby became stronger. That is also something I can very well imagine with Imu. That in the final fight against Luffy he will absorb the survivors of his contract partners and the people transformed into demons into himself. or that he will absorb their strength into himself. Domi Reversi has so far only been applied to people who were at their place of birth, from the giants to Sebek and on to the rest of the Davy clan. The only members of the Davy clan who were not transformed were Teach and Eris, if one counts them. And that is interesting, because both, as far as we know, were not born on God Valley. If Emu can only transform people with Domi Reversi at their place of birth, then it makes sense why these two of all people were able to escape this ability. This makes the celestial dragons a perfect target for Emu in the final war, to turn them into demons and then absorb their strength. But to return directly to Shanks, he was fortunately not born in Mary Geoise, but in God Valley. Meaning, if the assumption about Domi Reversi's limitation is correct, he should at least be safe from that. However, there is still the possibility that he still has a weak connection to Emu, and that Emu can use this. Now I would like to say that we can actually rule out this possibility as well, because Shanks should be able to defend himself with his Haki. But then Harold was not capable of that in this regard. Of course he had a higher contract, and the connection with Shanks should be really weak, if there is even one at all. But ultimately we cannot completely rule out this variant. However, I would say that it is quite unlikely that Emu still has something against Shanks through this, that could really become dangerous for him. Perhaps it allows Emu to attack Shanks better, but that it can completely overcome his defenses on its own, I rather do not believe. But that is not the point where I see the greatest danger for Shanks. I see that rather in the ability that Emu used against Gunko and Harold, namely altering their character. We do not know how subtle Emu can be in doing this, but I would assume that small changes, or if anything commands, would not be particularly noticeable. On the contrary, they could be such that even a Shanks would overlook them. I am a big fan of Star Wars, and Order 66 is one of the absolute key points in the entire story. What if Emu has installed something like that in Shanks and possibly other subordinates? Something like, when Emu says word X, fight against all people who oppose Emu. That would be something that would normally never be triggered, and consequently I also see no reason why it should be noticed by anyone. Such a command could be slumbering somewhere in Shanks' mind without him realizing it, but how likely is that really? I would say that Emu actually should have no reason to install such a command in his Holy Knights and Gorosei, simply because he can reach them from anywhere in the world. But with the God's Knights it looks different, doesn't it? They could betray him. I mean, Shanks betrayed him. That Emu would install it in them as a kind of security guarantee would make sense, if he is really capable of doing so, especially with someone like Shanks, who was on the ship of the Pirate King. In my eyes, this possibility is not super likely, but it definitely exists, and at the same time it is also not super unlikely. So let's take a look at the question of whether something like this would fit into the plot, simply to get another perspective. And here I would say that it could definitely be an exciting plot twist. It does not have to be the end of Shanks. He could free himself from this control again, after causing some damage, and after being injured himself, similar to how Gunko was on the verge of remembering. After all, it would be a somewhat different situation than with a Harold, who had an active connection to Emu. Primarily, I see it as a plot device that Oda can use, and as a potential plot twist. It could also lead to the end of Shanks, so that Luffy keeps his straw hat. But just as well, Shanks could survive the incident, perhaps proving that someone can break free from Emu's control, or perhaps it will be Luffy who frees him. The point is, I do not really see it as a problem for the plot. Even if it is not a necessity, it is an option, and consequently it should at least be considered from this perspective. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Here you can now go to a video that I can recommend to you, and in that sense, ciao and until next time.